Hello, everyone, and welcome back down here to the Gamer's Den with me, your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. I'm sure you've all noticed, but I'm not in my usual spot once again. Today, I was thinking, well, with regards to last weekend's episode about running mystery games, mystery campaigns, or stories, I thought, well, maybe let's go a little bit more in depth and let's actually set up and plan a mystery adventure. Now, as always, this is going to be somewhat broad strokes, but I still wanted to go through step by step, cover the four primary things that we think about when we're putting together these games, and just kind of see what we come out with at the end of it all. And also, this hopefully should help you with your own planning and putting together these types of mystery games. Certainly, I found these steps to be helpful, and I believe that they will be for you as well. So, with that said, let's go ahead and just dive right on into it and get going on this, shall we? So, like we talked about before, we need to have four things in mind when we're putting together these mysteries. One, we need the crime or mystery to solve. Doesn't help to put together a mystery game if there's no mystery around it to solve. Secondly, once we figure out what the crime is or the mystery is, we need to know who has the motive and who did it. Without having a culprit, there's really not much for the players to do over the course of the game. The third thing, we need a plausible red herring or two. We need a couple of paths for the players to chase that don't, not that they don't necessarily pan out, but when they come up with evidence that shows, oh yeah, this person was not involved, or they come up with a sufficient amount of evidence to point a different direction, it just feels like the players are at least getting somewhere over the course of the investigation. And not only that, but it keeps a certain amount of tension there and keeps things interesting, especially if some of these red herrings or suspects are people that are genuinely dangerous or threatening. It makes things a little bit more interesting without having to throw in a lot of direct combat. Just having that bit of tension there over the course of roleplay and trying to conduct their investigations without ruffling too many feathers or stirring the pot too badly can be a whole lot of fun. And number four, since I already mentioned it, we need to have a trail of evidence for the players to follow, as well as a certain amount of flexibility. Now, to start with, the evidence should be fairly general, and it's going to be little bits and pieces here and there, depending on the context of what you're going for. But the evidence is still going to be broad, indicate things that are broad enough that allow room for having a number of suspects and a couple of red herring trails for the players to follow over the course of the game. Now, for this, what I have in mind so far for what we're putting together today, I figure why not go, instead of going with a classical murder, let's go with a heist, in particular a museum heist. So, in this case, we're going with a museum heist, like I said. Now, for this, what I have in mind is an important or valuable artifact has been stolen from this museum. Now, depending on the setting that you're going for, the setting that you're in, or the type of game that you're running, there may not necessarily be a museum. Like if you're reaching back to a time period, even if it's a fantasy setting, if you're in a time period before there are really a lot of great public works, like something predating full-on functional museums, you still have instances where there were rare, valuable, or interesting artifacts that were gathered and collected. It's just instead of being inside of grand museums, these are rooms of curiosity, objects of interest that noblemen, noble women, lords and ladies would have had within their manors. At a certain point in time, it was fashionable to have these things to display how worldly, knowledgeable, and wealthy these people were in order to have this collection of artifacts present within their manors. And these were some of the first early instances of of museums in a certain sense. Other places where valuable objects or artifacts might have been held would have been churches and cathedrals and the like, any sort of temples where something of that nature would have been gathered. These sorts of interesting things. Um, but if you're going with something a bit more sci-fi or steampunk, well, cyberpunk, for example, Shadowrun, there would be museums for sure, but also you have uh, great arcologies, big, basically self-contained mini cities in which the mega corporations house their employees, their workstations, stores, and shopping centers and recreational centers for them to enjoy, all while being in a self contained hub with minimal outside influence. These sorts of places might have their own museums, but not only that, but since the wealthy would live at the very top of these arcologies, of these megastructures, the wealthy may have their own displays and collections of interesting objects or valuable artifacts. And so, for a crime to be committed in those places, certainly would be an interesting thing, and present some unique challenges, particularly if the players, especially if they're playing Shadowrunners, if the players are brought in to investigate a crime that happens within some megacorp high level managers own private estate at the top of an arcology. They want them to investigate because they have the necessary contacts outside. They know where people would go to ground. They know the local fences and smugglers. There's a certain amount, and also they want the thieves to be dealt with quickly, quietly, and privately. There's a certain amount of sense there to be made for bringing in a private investigator. This particular high-level manager or executive bringing in their Mr. Johnson to take care of and clean up the mess afterwards, and make sure this embarrassing little scandal and failure of security gets handled quietly and swept under the rug is fairly important, especially if the object stolen in question was, say, a set of plans for some new high-end product that the mega corporation was planning on unveiling and releasing to the public for sale. Having the plans for that stolen and another rival appropriating those plans and beating them to market with a similar, slightly adjusted product would be just massive. Can't have that loss of profit share and market value. Anyways, I'm running on a bit too long. It's just point being, depending on the type of game and the type of setting you're running around in, you may have to adjust the crime a little bit. If you're in a setting that predates museums, you're looking at rooms of curiosity with objects of art and little oddities collected from across the globe. If you're in a cyberpunk setting or a sci-fi setting, there will be museums, but you're looking at more high-tech security rather than, say, anything magically related. Although, and again, in Shadowrun's case, you have high-tech security features as well as magical security features in place. So you can adjust and play with it and tweak this as needed. This is just the general bare bones skeleton for a particular crime. Anyways, let's go on from here. So, some of the things that are directly known right off the top: an important and valuable artifact was stolen or item. The guards are incapacitated and the security's been bypassed and or disabled, and there's little physical evidence left behind. The guards never saw what it was that hit them. Again, depending on setting, this could indicate a couple of things, but if it's on with this evidence right here, we can infer a couple of things, or ideally the players will be able to infer a number of things, hopefully. One, if it's just the artifact that was stolen, that means that the thieves who came in knew exactly what they were going for. They knew where to get it, how to retrieve it, and then they took nothing else. They had one objective, so they were motivated and fairly precise in what they were doing. And also, the guards being incapacitated rather than killed, they weren't looking to leave a bloody mess behind. It's not that they wouldn't have if they needed to, but they were able to isolate and take down the guards without raising much of an alarm. That indicates a fairly high level of skill. And also, the security being bypassed and disabled means that they had the means and ability to disable the other security features aside from the guards. If you're in a magical setting, um, it would indicate that they had somebody that's knowledgeable with traps, possibly has magic on hand in order to deal with any magical security features, and may have used magic to incapacitate the guards. The fact that there's also little physical evidence behind is indicative of a couple of things, too, that hopefully your players will be able to infer over the course of investigating the crime scene. This is either somebody with a high degree of skill, planning, and forethought. Well, all of this indicates that the thief or thieves were possessing a high degree of skill and ability, planning, and forethought. But magic would also assist greatly with that. Magic just does so many wonderful things. But this level of skill and ability is rare. It's uncommon. That doesn't happen a lot. So yes, there's not a whole lot of evidence, but the fact that there's not a whole lot of evidence to go off of means that the pool of suspects narrows down quite a bit. You can rule out a whole lot of people. This wasn't a smash and grab sort of run. These were people that wanted to just get this done quickly and quietly, and had the means to get this done quickly and quietly, disabling all sorts of security features and getting out. That narrows down the pool of suspects capable of pulling off this crime quite a lot. And not only that, but if it's somebody or a group of people with a high degree of skill, well, if you're good at something, never do it for free. These people, if they were hired by somebody, would have cost a pretty penny. So that narrows down the number of people with motive down to people with the means to support their motive. So you're looking at people with a good deal of money that are able and willing to expend a decent portion of that money on facilitating this particular crime, retaining the services of people able to facilitate this particular crime. So that's a couple of things that can be inferred. Also, if the guards were incapacitated rather than killed, and they were incapacitated and isolated in such a way that no alarm was raised, that can be an indication that that whoever committed the crime and knocked out the guards knew the guards' routes, or at least, if not knew the guards' routes, was able to locate and isolate enough of the guards and leave them incapacitated as to not raise an alarm and get back out quickly enough before the guards were discovered by, well, anybody else who may have been on patrol. Depending on the number of guards and the size of the room and the number of security features, and again, also the setting that you're working with, this was probably something pulled off with a team of people. If you're dealing with guards, traps, and any magical security features, throwing in high tech, if you're running a Shadowrun sort of setting or any sort of sci-fi setting, this indicates that it was at least a group of people. Probably, I don't know, from a realistic standpoint, it's probably not anything higher than 4 people. The reason for that being, well, think about what people are like. People are people. People like to talk. One person tells another person about something. That person will pass that information on to, even if it's just one other person, we're now up to a total of 6 people who know something about this particular crime, and that number can potentially expand pretty quickly, especially if they talk to anybody that's gabby or has it just loves to gossip and run about all the interesting bits of news coming through. So if you're running with a crew of 4 or more people, the odds of the information about what you just did getting out just really begins to exponentially expand. So I figure small number of people with a high degree of skill set, with the backing and means to pull off the crime, you really start to get a picture of the kinds of characters you're looking for. people with high-end skills and a certain amount of professionalism, or at least familiarity with one another to pull something like this off. But when you're looking at the crime scene and the players are investigating things, you want the players to feel like they are competent and capable, in particular, head and shoulders capable above the investigators on hand. And so there should be some amount of hidden evidence or information on hand that just has not immediately jumped out to the in-house investigators and become readily apparent to them. And for that, we just have a few hidden bits of evidence here. I've only listed 2 examples, but we could really greatly expand this to, well, any number of things. But for this, I put down a DC 20 spot check. There's a pillar-mounted banner slightly off-center. A successful check means that the player has noticed a smudge just above the rod the banner's affixed to. If they look at that smudge and follow up, which with the successful check, that would be the case. They look up and follow up, and it's revealed to the players that the second-story window is slightly out of place, and if and when they investigate further, they find that the window is unlocked. Also, there's a janitor or member of the cleaning staff who is missing and unable to be reached after their shift. Now, for this, the janitor or the cleaning staff member provided a greater degree of access to the location. They were paid a generous sum to allow this access. Doesn't know who paid them right off. Now, I was trying to think of some other details to bring in, but really, having those 3 bits of information right there is a pretty good degree of knowledge to give to the players. It again, it helps to indicate a greater number of things, that a bit more evidence that will help them narrow down where to look and what to look for. Now, with this here, again, this is just the start of all of this, but from here, we have some people of interest, at least, a rough picture of people of interest, things to look for. In this case, the thief or thieves are definitely people of interest. Even though they don't know who it is, they have an idea that they are looking for a very highly skilled person or group of persons that pulled this crime off. They're looking for somebody who hired them. If there was anybody that hired them, stealing a high value item can just be reward and motivation enough for a group of thieves. If they, in particular, if they have a fence, somebody that can move high value items, especially high value items that are going to be harder to move because they're more specialized. And also, not only that, but because it's a high value item, the owners are going to notice that it's missing and really be putting the word out, meaning the item is looked for. It's a dangerous item to move. Having it in your possession means a lot of jail time, or in the case of, well, depending on who it was stolen from, a really quick and awful end. Also, another person of interest is the janitor, who has gone missing after the crime, after their shift. Now, we also have some suspects with motive that I had come up with for this. A local crime boss. A local crime boss would have the means, the money to facilitate this crime happening. They'd have the money to hire this particular thief or crew of thieves. They would have the means to get in contact with them and know them by their reputation. They would also have the ability to hide and sell the item if selling the item is their goal. For this, because that's a pretty obvious one, it's a red herring. This is probably one that the local investigators are going to be all over and focusing on. They're going to already be doing the digging there. The players can certainly choose to do some digging on their own if they want. This may bring them into conflict with whatever the local law enforcement is, and could potentially make things more interesting. But if the players are smart, they'll go ahead and let the cops do the work for them, since they're already going to be pouring their resources and time into looking at this particular suspect. The next suspect up is a rare objects collector. For this, the collector is either a rival of the owner or if it's a setting that has a lot of public works like museums uh, or uh, or the like, they really desired the object and made an offer that was turned down. They would have the means to pay for the theft of this particular object. This is also a red herring, though maybe not one that the police would focus on right away, or at least have the same level of interest in focusing on. Now, the suspect that actually did do this, at least for this particular story that I've imagined and put together here, is the thief himself, or at least the ringleader that put together this group of thieves. They have the skill to pull off the heist. Also, the thieves would know the particular fences and how to get this thing moved. For this, I'm picturing that they're not actually going to sell the item within the city, but they were also not. But the particular twist that I have in mind for this, for the thief, is uh, for this particular story. What I have imagined is that the thief is the curator for the object, for the museum, and it makes a certain amount of sense because a curator, somebody who spends a lot of time with rare and interesting objects, valuable objects, would inherently know the value of the object, and depending on the skill level of the curator may be drawn to travel around or called upon to travel around and take a look at various objects, apply their expertise, weigh in on them, even assess their value or their authenticity. So, the curator would have the knowledge set and may have privately, in their own time or over the course of their life, developed their skills to be a very exceptional thief. And part of what makes them an exceptional thief, because they're a curator and they go around to this particular thief has gone around to various museums or locations where there are objects on hand, um, would be able to get familiar with the layout, would be able to get familiar with some of the systems in place. Maybe not all of them, but just by being in the location, they can gather this knowledge and they can begin a degree of social engineering by, say, getting to know the staff on hand that are corruptible, bribable, or able to be, worked with in any one way or another in order to create more flaws and weaknesses in security systems. Now, again, like I said, depending on the setting, this may need to be tweaked a little bit. For example, running with the Shadowrun example, the object in question was not an art object, but say certain plans for a product being put to market were stolen. There wouldn't really be a curator for that in that instance. We might be looking at say a systems tech or an engineer or designer wanting to jump ship and switch teams over to another mega corporation. They could be the thief in question, but because they're like a lead engineer, they have some of the money and means to pay for a team of Shadowrunners to help them steal the object as well as get them out of the arcology. Uh, how do they have the means to pay them? Well, there's all kinds of pay data available to take on the way out, breaking into a mega corporation's engineering spaces, their labs where they conduct all these tests and experiments. There's plenty of things that a lead engineer could get a team of Shadowrunners access to that would be sufficient monetary motivation to get them to participate in this particular heist, even if it means pissing off a mega corporation. Anyways, this is fairly bare bones, like I said, but this gives you an idea how to set this up and the number of things that you can infer to begin building this trail of evidence for the players to follow. Not only that, but this gives you a number of different staff to use as suspects or witnesses to interview. And even if the players say, instead of looking at the janitor, they decide that, well, maybe this guard number one's story does not add up. We need to talk to him more. I think he may have been involved with this particular crime. oh, they can go, once they investigate, they can talk to the guard, interrogate them, but then the guard's shift lead or their commander or whatever comes in and says, hey, no, we have footage, or we have this new evidence now that shows that this guard was not involved. He was actually was taken down first. We do know that we've been trying to call all the staff that were on shift to get in touch with them and find out if they noticed anything. This janitor, we haven't been able to locate or notice. This way, you allow the players to investigate any lines of logic or reasoning following trails of evidence that they spot that you may have missed, but you can gently steer them back onto track without just closing the book on them, saying no, and railroading them onto the trail. You just gently nudge and steer them back in place while allowing them free reign to move about and explore this world, this particular story that you put together for them. Now, we can go quite a bit further into this, but like I said, I just wanted something bare bones to kind of show you how to put together and plan these particular kinds of crimes and stories. With all this information here, you can begin inferring plenty to put this all together. And there you have it. Following these 4 principles, we came up with just a page of information where we are able to infer and come up with so many different things for an involving and fairly engaging plot for your players to follow. And this works and is applicable regardless of setting. This just needs to be tweaked. This particular story just needs to be tweaked a little bit, but it can be made to work and function with a number of different game systems and settings. And it's robust enough that you have something that can last for a couple of sessions, or it's simple enough that you can have something that wraps up over the course of a single night. I like things to be a little bit more engaging and drawn out. Plus, when you're running a game with 4 or 5, in some instances 6 people, things can get drawn out anyways, and it can take a while to get past a couple of scenes or a couple of different acts and move forward. But with this particular setting and setup, there's a little bit of room in there for some combat if the players decide that they want to try to engage with this whole crime boss thing. Also, once this particular crime lord becomes alerted to the fact that there's a valuable object out on the market, it's entirely reasonable to assume that they may send their own investigators out, their own people out to begin looking for this object. Either one, looking for their cut of the action because a crime was just committed in their territory without their permission, without anybody talking to them or willing to offer up a little bit of tribute to them. Not only that, but say they're not even concerned about the tributary aspect of everything. It's a valuable bit of information or a valuable object there that they could profit from greatly because they have the means to hide and move and sell this object. So it's an opportunity for them to jump in. So there's your combat angle right there. If you have players that tend to be a bit more hungry for a little bit of action there rather than just the investigating. But as I've said before in previous videos, you need to change it up, mix it up, and offer your players a little bit of everything, and just to keep things interesting and keep them engaged. It's always good to keep them on their toes, even if it's the players that want something just a little bit more combat heavy. Getting something that has a bit more role play and a bit more thinking oriented can be a lot of fun, especially just because it's a change of pace. It makes things really worthwhile, and makes the future sessions where you do focus a bit more on combat just that much sweeter because, well, I mean, if you're eating nothing but sugar all day, every day, it begins to lose its flavor a little bit, on top of you developing a bit of diabetes. But that's a whole nother thing. The point is, you need to change up the flavors, make things a little bit spicier, a bit more interesting to keep things engaging and fun. And hopefully this will help you, because running mysteries and crime-oriented things can always be a bit tricky, especially when, as I talked about before, when you're running stories revolving around mysteries or crimes, the good old whodunit. It's easy to forget that what you thought was obvious is not obvious to the players. So having things laid out like this where it's fairly generalized, again, this is only a page of information here, but there's enough information here for you to create a multitude of different stories or evidence and various aspects of gameplay here. And it's that wealth of information that you can infer and build upon will allow you a certain amount of flexibility in working with the players as they start working out this particular chain of logic. This has everything you need to set up this story from start to finish. And the great part about this is there's even more flexibility that comes with this. So this is focused on solving a crime. What if we flip things around a little bit and the players are the ones planning the crime? For example, going with the Shadowrun instance that I keep using and throwing out there, what if the players are the Shadowrunners that the lead engineer reaches out to? Or say this lead engineer reaches out to the rival mega corporation, and the Mr. Johnson that the players work with regularly is the one that gets handed the job, and he brings it to the players and sets them up with the job of extracting this particular engineer along with the information that he has about this particular product that the rivals are now fighting over. That right there, this just knowing this opens up a great wealth of things for the players to play around with, planning out their own heists, their own crimes, whether it's their own little assassination run, extracting a VIP, stealing valuable data, or robbing a museum of its curiosities, or breaking into a manor and stealing the objects of interest out of the curiosities room. There's plenty of things that we can do with just knowing how to plan and set up a crime or a murder mystery or whatever sort of heist sort of thing. Once we know how to plan it out, we can set up something for the players to plan out their own. And that just is so much fun. Anyways, we could probably go on talking about this for quite a while, but we'll wrap it up for now. I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. If you liked today's video, please consider giving me a like, and if you've been enjoying the series of videos I've been putting out so far, consider subscribing. And if you do subscribe, click the bell icon there. That way you get notified the next time I upload more content to this channel. Once again, I've been your host, Jordan, your master of lore and storyteller extraordinaire. You all have yourselves a good night.